and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove, and I'm joined by the next CEO of US Soccer. His name is Taylor Rockwell. You're hired.
I'm hired. All right. I look forward to being a behind-the-scenes villain for the next 4 years.
Villain?
I don't know, because I feel like the CEO of US Soccer, like, we knew his name, we know theoretically what he does, but I feel like there's a lot of strings being pulled that we attribute to other people pulling. So I look forward to that job, yeah.
The news is Dan Flynn is stepping down as CEO of US Soccer. I would not call Dan Flynn a villain in any way.
Nor would I. I think he's another one. I guess I would put him in the same boat a little bit as Sunil Gulati.
Yeah.
He's a person who
they were a team. They were a combo.
Yeah, you can say negative things about. I think at the end of the day, you're going to look at as a person who really helped turn around U.S. Soccer, help them be in the position they're in. But then with that comes they're in the position they're in, which is in the best position right now.
I guess the graph trends upwards and then takes a deep dive around October 2017, right?
Yeah, you're right. I think I'm probably opening too harshly, and I think maybe that's part of the reason is because of that graph dropping off. But it is partially because there is that relative lack of transparency when it comes to U.S. Soccer and how things have operated in the past. And so I think there's, in my mind, it is like anytime a CEO is retiring, I'm sort of like, I mean, I appreciate what you did, but I also feel like there were probably some decisions in there that were more about, making a little bit of dollars versus making the game grow a little bit.
So if you want to look at this as US Soccer, new broom, bringing change, I mean, it's one of those things that you could point to, right? There's obviously new president, Carlos Cordero. People have mixed feelings about that. New CEO would be an important position because depending on how hands-on Carlos Cordero is, the CEO is a super important job. So who is chosen next? I think you're essentially chosen by the board of directors. It's going to be an important job within US Soccer.
Yeah, and I think it's also maybe indicative of my mindset that I just assume that CEOs are evil, and I also just assume that if I were given that power, I would become villainous. That's how it would work.
First thing, we're going to hollow out a volcano.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, where else? You all want to make our home base in Chicago. I say hollowed out volcano in the middle of the Pacific. Come on.
Second thing, get me some sharks with some laser beams attached to their head.
I don't think that's too big of an ask, Daryl. I don't think that's too big of an ask.
So we actually don't know who...
Give me Graham Zusi with a laser beam attached to his head. That's what I want.
I mean, if only we could have had that during World Cup qualifying. So we don't know who the replacement's going to be. One candidate I see being a possibility is the current Chief Commercial Officer, Jay Berhalter, brother of Greg Berhalter. It could be a Berhalter takeover at US Soccer House.
I mean, and
somewhat accidentally.
And when have dynasties within the United States ever gone horribly wrong? I think it's a great idea. It must be a sort of... Like, having just said that CEOs are villainous, it must be a sort of frustrating
Do they
thing.
all need sharks with laser beams? That's what I'm
Probably
asking.
not. Probably not all of them. But it must be a difficult time to be a Berhalter, even as it's probably a great time to be a Berhalter, because I do think we've heard some rumblings that maybe there's always that consideration of if you have the head coach and the CEO be Berhalters, does it look too much like there's this consolidation of power, even if those two are very qualified for those positions?
I even think that may be why US Soccer has been a bit wary of addressing or announcing the Greg Berhalter as US men's national team coach rumor. I think because his brother's the commercial officer, I think they might think it looks bad, so they don't want to announce it. Yeah, that's kind of a conspiracy theory, but it's also a common sense theory.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would say, going along with the common sense line, I would encourage everyone, regardless of who the CEO is, maybe treat it with the level of neutrality it deserves, as opposed to, oh, well, this is just a terrible hire from the outside. If it is Jay Berhalter, again, we don't really, I cannot tell you specifically what the CEO does. If I read for 5 minutes, maybe I could. Maybe if I read for an hour, maybe I still couldn't.
I do know, for example, that Dan Flynn was so important that when they were going to fire Jurgen Klinsmann much earlier than when they did, they held off of doing it because he either had a heart attack or heart surgery. He was hospitalized.
I think
essentially.
He had heart surgery, I believe.
So they couldn't go through with it. That's how important the CEO was. I think, but in some ways, the general manager now fills some of that role. So I don't know if the new CEO will be more important or less important in terms of what happens with the men's national team.
It's fewer important, by the way. No, but yes. And with that in mind, again, I would just say that if it is Jay Berhalter, don't just assume, oh, this is SUM and this is, U.S. soccer being corrupt and only hiring from within, and instead see it as like maybe this is a person who's earned that position.
But maybe also ask those questions.
That's
a good neutrality, right? Don't be knee-jerk against it, but maybe think about where they come from. And why.
Be informed and critical. That's what I would say.
What if it's like Bill Gates? They could just hire some other CEO from outside. I know Bill Gates is basically retired, but
I genuinely don't know how I feel about that, unless he suddenly, it turns out, had been a secret soccer fan this whole time, and we're all about developing the perfect soccer team. Then maybe I'd be into it.
Huge Sounders fan.
Yes.
All right, shall we get to today's listener questions?
Let's do it.
While we are recording, there is Champions League happening right now, but this is part of our mini vacation, we're going to call it. We are going to put out a couple of listener question shows this week so that we can take a couple of days off later in the week. I'm off to a wedding. Taylor's got family in town.
This is true.
Luckily, we have some great listener questions to answer.
We sure do.
Am I asking the first one?
You are indeed.
First question today comes from Mark Gardberg. Mark asks, or says, there are so few Americans in the Premier League, and virtually all are with relegation fighters. For example, Fulham, you mentioned Tim Ream on the most recent show, Huddersfield, where Danny Williams is coming back from injury, and Newcastle, where DeAndre Yedlin is doing his thing. Mark wants to know, is this a perception problem, or is it the painful reality?
I mean, I think it is the reality, is the first thing I'll say. Like, it is the reality that is where most Americans who are playing in England right now or in the Premier League right now, that's their level. But I don't think that's necessarily a negative reality, strangely enough.
Okay.
Because, first of all, I would say that maybe goalkeepers aside, historically, that's kind of where Americans have been playing. Even when, like, Jeff Cameron was with Stoke and Stoke were looking at signing other Americans, that was still a Stoke team that always felt like maybe they're going to go down this season.
It was a relegation fighter that was always winning the fight.
Exactly. And so I think, there we go. So, I mean, outside of maybe Landon Donovan going to Everton, maybe Clint Dempsey in some of those seasons with Fulham, some of those seasons with Tottenham.
Stay at Spurs.
Yeah, exactly. Like, maybe those are the outliers. But for the most part, I think that's about where Americans have been in terms of the Premier League, especially the modern Premier League. And that's the key thing for me, is that this current Premier League, it is, I would say, the most difficult league in the world. And I know that gets a lot of flack. I'm sure we'll get some tweets about La Liga and the Bundesliga and what have you. But it's still commercially, from that vantage point, it is like the one that everybody wants to be involved in. It's where the money is. And so with that comes, that's where you have more money to buy more players. And that's where there's a lot more pressure. So you can't really experiment with a young American who might be good.
I 100% agree with that. I also think this is a generational problem, is that we do have, famously, this sort of missing generation of talent, so that we have older players and we have younger players, and we don't really have super high-quality players right in the middle, right? So, like, maybe... the big name US players of the past, like Michael Bradley and Jeff Cameron, Bradley had a very brief spell in the Premier League. And the younger guys, like Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, maybe one day Tyler Adams. I think these guys are maybe... Pulisic could play in the Premier League tomorrow for a team, right?
Yeah.
I think there's just like a current missing generation. And we may even see that the next generation does better than the likes of Danny Williams and Tim Ream.
Yeah. I mean, I think...
Like Pulisic at Liverpool would be the great example.
That would be. But I would also say the other aspect of this for me is that I don't know if that's necessary. Because when you talk about Americans playing abroad, you want them playing abroad. Like, that is fundamentally the key thing. And yes, you want them playing at the highest level possible. If Christian Pulisic went to Liverpool, was a consistent starter, broke out, became one of the best players in England, then that's an amazing accomplishment.
Or just became celebrated as, like, if you imagine, like, all the plaudits that are given to, say, Sadio Mane as part of the Firmino, Salah, Sadio Mane front three, if that was Pulisic instead, that would easily be the most celebrated American player, right?
Yeah, certainly. But I would say, though, that, like, say you have an American doing well at Watford, who are probably going to be comfortably mid-table this season. Is that
They gave Wolves a beating.
There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the sign of things to come for Wolverhampton. Probably not. They'll be fine. But, like, I guess what I mean is that better than, like, playing for a very good team in Germany or playing for a good team in France or Italy? I don't think so. Like, I think if you're playing at a high level in the first division or top division in a few different leagues in around Europe, like, that, to me, you're still getting those reps, you're still getting that experience against top level opponents. It almost, in my opinion, becomes, having said what I said about the Premier League in the very beginning, it's more about, I think, we as fans and supporters or pundits or what have you, it looks better for American soccer to have Pulisic playing for Liverpool and succeeding because it proves, Americans can play at that most public of levels.
But do you not think that's important then? Because I feel like that would be a huge validation for American soccer.
See, I think that's the thing. Is like from a validation standpoint, yes. I genuinely mean this. I promise I'm not just trying to be contrarian. I don't know if it makes that big of a difference because if Christian Pulisic, he's playing in a position for Dortmund where he's getting games every day and he's starting to get assists and goals.
Playing Champions League.
And then if he's going to play that same position for the U.S. national team, is it that helpful if he moves to Liverpool? And yes, maybe he wins the Premier League title. Maybe they win the Champions League. Maybe they finish top 4 every season.
Yeah.
But if he's doing the same stuff, maybe it raises his game a little bit. But I think it's definitely the case that it's more about the visibility of Christian Pulisic in England as opposed to necessarily what he's doing in England and how that's making him a better player. Does that make sense?
I think that's absolutely fair. It's worrying that Pulisic's the only example of someone we can think of that could definitely play top end Premier League.
I think Weston McKennie would be in that conversation if, like we talked about this yesterday, that he's just constantly changing positions this season and it's really difficult. If he had been playing number 8 every single game for Schalke or number 6, number 10, whatever, we would think, okay, I could see him making that move to another club. But because there's been that instability and Schalke are struggling, maybe less so for him right now.
What about the idea that in the past there are guys who maybe would be Premier League regulars now, but they essentially failed in the Premier League? And I'm looking specifically at, say, Josie Altidore.
Yep.
Right? Like he did really well in the Netherlands, got his move to the Premier League, and it wasn't all his fault, but he did not succeed at Sunderland. There's a version of that where...
Or Hull, but yeah.
Or Hull. And there's a version of that where, even if because Sunderland's where he spent most of the time, right? Even if they were... not doing really well, if he had impressed enough, another Premier League team might have taken a gamble on him. And you have to look back at it in the end and say, Altidore had a couple of years in the Premier League and was found wanting. And then that's our best, our first choice striker of the last few years who was deemed and proven not good enough for the Premier League.
Okay.
So that's not a perception problem. Like he was actually tried and tested and just didn't quite make the cut because the Premier League is so hard.
Yeah. But I guess this is what I'm trying to say though, is that say he had stayed at AZ, continued to score all the goals he was scoring. Now we know the Dutch league isn't the best when it comes to defenses and defensive positioning. So maybe he gets a move to a Bundesliga club instead, and he's playing a similar role that he was playing at AZ, and he continues to put those goals in. I would argue that that's a much better position than going to Sunderland, who are Sunderland and are where they are now, and he's playing at the same position but a very different way and being asked to do very different things. Even if he had succeeded and scored 6 goals or 7 goals or whatever, it's fundamentally changing the way he's playing, I think. And so it still isn't necessarily that important to me that he's playing in the Premier League as much as it is he's playing in Europe and doing well.
That's fair.
I want him to play there, don't get me wrong. I would very much happily... I remember the days of seeing Clint Dempsey scoring for Fulham every week and being like, yes, that's awesome, there's an American doing it, and I get why that's exciting. But at this point, I kind of just want it to be about what we're able to put on the field wearing a national team jersey and playing fundamentally good soccer.
Okay, so to the latter part of Mark's question, before we wrap up on this... is there a perception problem? Essentially, are there players that deserve to be at the top end of the Premier League but aren't? I'll give you my gut reaction is probably not.
Yeah, and I would say deserve got nothing to do with it. It comes down to what you've earned, and I think, right now, I don't think that there's this stigma around Americans. If anything, I think the reputation of Americans is they work hard and they're cheap. That's what I think the reputation for U.S. soccer is. That's not a great reputation.
You mean like they don't pick up the bill when you go out for dinner?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's...
But they tip generously.
Of course. Even when it makes people uncomfortable. I've had that experience in England where I tipped the barmaid and she looked at me like, what are you doing?
What? You left your money here.
Yeah, exactly.
Next.
Did I use that one right? Is it barmaid?
I mean, it can be.
Okay.
If you go back a long way.
In this pub it was.
Was this pub in the 50s?
It was, yeah. It seemed to be.
All right, next question.
Next question comes from Paul Cummings, who simply asks, whatever happened to Gedion Zelalem?
So, I shouldn't be laughing because it was quite bad what happened to Gedion Zelalem. I think this is an interesting question because I've seen this floating around. A lot of people asking, like, did he fail in his career or something? He got a horrible injury playing at the U20 World Cup in May of 2017. He has only just recently, in the past few weeks, back in full practice. So he has been out for, I'm not very good at math when it isn't 12 months or 18 months. I want to say 16 months.
It was 16 months, which is confusing because the injury happened, I think, 6 or 7 months ago. But I think before that, he was nursing injuries as well.
The injury happened 6 or 7 months ago. The injury happened in May 2017.
Oh, you're right, 2017. So I still don't get then, because it was supposed to be 6 to 8 months initially.
There was
then
a
he's been
setback.
out for 16
months. There was
months.
a reported setback in January 2018. So I think it's basically he had this ruptured cruciate.
Yeah.
Then on his first attempt at a comeback, I think
we go.
It was really wasn't specifically reported, but we do know that something went wrong, set him back. So now the totality of how long he was out is about 16 months.
There's a chance I forgot it was 2018 just now. But yeah, so it is the ruptured ACL. He, I think, returned in the September international window because I believe that's when he was training with the Arsenal first team while so many of their players were away on international duty.
I read that story too.
And I think he traveled, for the U23s as well for a friendly. I don't think he played.
So we haven't seen him back on the field yet, but he's getting closer from what I can tell. I also saw a quick video posted to social media of essentially him doing sprints between poles.
Yeah. And I think, which
sounds small, but when you've had a ruptured cruciate, that's actually quite a big thing.
Any cutting is a good thing. And I would say the other things to note, I believe at the beginning of the season, Arsenal exercised the 1-year contract extension, which I think was probably just a good faith, hey, we'll get you back into training and see where you are. Maybe we can sell you on. Maybe you end up fitting in.
So he goes to summer of 2019. He's still an Arsenal player. Weirdly, if he could get on the field for Arsenal, he would be the exception to Mark Gardberg's first question.
Exactly.
Right? He would be an American player at a high-end Premier League team.
And I will say, with that in mind, that it does seem like maybe there's a chance that happens, a very small chance, but mostly because it's
a Lloyd Christmas chance.
Yes, you're saying there's a chance because Unai Emery is there, and I think that maybe he wants to look at some of the academy players coming through and see what the status is there. And I guess anytime you've got a new manager, it is a new opportunity for a new beginning, and so maybe we do see Gedion Zelalem if he can impress in that first team training. Maybe he gets a Carabao Cup appearance or a late sub appearance in a Europa League game. Not saying he's going to then cement himself in the Arsenal squad. I feel like there's a decent chance we see him getting a move at the end of the summer.
I would guess maybe even a loan in January. I have no idea where to. Right, in the past, he's gone to Rangers, where I think he did quite well, and VVV Venlo in the Netherlands, where he didn't do too well.
The Dutch, who were in the second division, yeah?
Yeah, it seemed to me like they just had a settled team, and there wasn't really a place there for Gedion Zelalem. So I don't know where that correct move would be, but I wouldn't be opposed to a move in January. Maybe a championship team that needs, a passing midfielder who can hold on to the ball.
I don't know what looks worse. I think if he goes on loan, to me it means that Arsenal are ready to let him go, regardless of what happens. Because I think if they are evaluating him for the next month or two, and he starts to impress and they think, well, maybe we want to develop him a little bit more and we see if he can maybe fit in a few games when the pressure's off and go from there, then they keep him. If they're loaning him out after the injury and without much time to blend back in, then to me it feels like, you're just not going to fit here. We'll send you out on loan. We'll get you some minutes so then maybe we get a little bit of a return on the investment.
The worrying thing for me with Zelalem as well, not worrying, because I'm glad that he's back and may still have a career, essentially, after this horrible injury, is when he was first thought about as, he's going to be this US player, because he's now chosen the US national team over Germany. He's very good at holding onto the ball, very good at sort of a pass and move type thing. It does seem like suddenly central midfield is populated with players that are younger than he is. Suddenly it's Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie are sort of all ready to go in that role. And now it's a much tougher path for Zelalem back into the US men's national team.
Yeah.
And we almost have to think smaller. We just have to think, can he get minutes anywhere? Can he sort of play on loan somewhere? Can he get another contract at Arsenal?
Yeah. And I did see an Arsenal, I think it was like a fan blog, talking about what it would take for him to get a move to Major League Soccer, which felt like, do you all know something we don't know? But he also does feel like that type of player who maybe if things don't go his way, maybe he continues to fall off the radar, stay off the radar for a little bit, and then suddenly he's starting for Colorado or playing for a Dutch team, and then maybe a couple years from now, he does get that random call up to the national team, and we're all excited to see what he's done.
I'd be worried if he came to Major League Soccer, because I don't know if he's bigger than he was, but I could see him being one of those players that isn't deemed aggressive enough in central midfield, right? Like almost like a Jackson Ewell, maybe at San Jose, where he hasn't seen as many minutes as maybe we would like. I'd worry that would happen to Zelalem.
All right, well, time will tell.
Okay.
An optimistic note to end on.
Yeah,
time will tell, and then a loud exhale.
Well, let's cheer ourselves up
by
reminding ourselves that today's show is sponsored by SeatGeek.
That's right.
SeatGeek is sponsoring the Total Soccer Show. It used to be hard to buy and sell tickets to live events. SeatGeek makes it easy. Just tap away on your phone. You can buy and sell tickets to anything you like.
Live events, you say? What type of live events, Daryl?
Oh, maybe sporting ones like soccer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not going to do the full list? I was trying to bait you into the full list.
I'm just saying soccer is one of the possible things you can do.
It is. We've got the final weekend of the MLS regular season this weekend. Playoffs coming after that. You can find playoff tickets already. Somehow you can find like Eastern Conference semifinals tickets. Not quite sure how that's possible, but here we are. Or Eastern Conference finals tickets, I think it is. But either way, you can find also playoff tickets once those playoff matchups are set. SeatGeek will have the tickets if you want to wait till the last minute to get them.
We did have a tweet from Andrew Jenis, who went to Audi Field and used the Total Soccer Show discount code. He got $20 off his tickets with SeatGeek, and he saw Wayne Rooney score 2 goals and got a wave from Wayne Rooney.
And I think that's the game they clinched the playoffs as well. So there you go.
Yeah.
A solid weekend all around.
So
and $20 off, no less.
Not every the code will get you $20 off. It won't always guarantee that your team makes the playoffs.
That's a shame.
LA Galaxy fans should try it, but I'm not. There's absolutely no guarantee.
If we get a tweet from an LA Galaxy fan who's done it this weekend and they do qualify for the playoffs, then we'll say that it's official.
Then maybe there's something.
Unless an RSL fan does it too, in which case, never mind. All bets are off.
If you would like to get that $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase, you got to download the SeatGeek app, which is 100% free. You go to the settings, enter promo code TSS for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase.
There we are. So thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's episode of the Total Soccer Show. Remember, SeatGeek, life's an event. We've got the tickets.
Ready for the next question?
I am.
Okay, the next question comes from Nathan Grimm. Nathan Grimm wants to know... This is my favourite, weirdest question.
It's a pretty weird one.
If a top 10 club team were forced to play a match wearing sneakers, then what is the highest level team they could be expected to beat if the other team is wearing cleats? For instance, Nathan asks, would Liverpool be expected to beat an English League One side under these conditions? So, Premier League team, high-end Premier League team, wearing sneakers versus an opposition team wearing cleats.
I'm going to say it's a way bigger equalizer than people might think. And I think Liverpool especially would struggle. I'll explain why in a second. But I'll say this. Like, if you are wearing tennis shoes, we've both probably had to do that. Like, if we were playing pickup or something like that, wearing tennis shoes on grass already is an issue. If that grass has been watered, you're in a whole heap of trouble. Because basically, that means no cutting, no real confident planting. And I think we've both had that situation where you know you're going to have to plant and you're wearing flats, and you sort of have to do that like tippy-toe, slow down. There's no automatic stopping.
So wait, why no cutting?
Because you can't. Because it requires cleats to get stuck in so you can have that like pressure in the ground to anchor you almost.
Because your plant foot would slide as you try to cut. Yeah.
Or at least no cutting in the way that you need to, say, control a ball under like while dribbling at pace, or cutting to maybe get in good defensive position.
So can we alter that to no successful cutting?
Yeah, pretty much. Or no cutting and then standing up. And no cornering. Again, like if you're dribbling down the end line and you want to cut the ball inside, it's going to be a little harder. You're going to have to do, rather than like a 90 degree, it's going to be a slow angle that's easier to deal with.
Yeah.
And so I think with all that said, the reason why I say Liverpool would struggle more than others is because I think any team that plays high pressure, high intensity, lots of man
fast
marking.
Pace when they get the ball back.
Yeah, it requires a lot of traction, and I don't think you're going to get that with sneakers. I almost think a team that like sits back and is very defensive and slow, there's an argument to be made that like Manchester United would be more okay wearing sneakers than Liverpool because they're not all about speed and cutting and pace and power. It's more about, well, let's build up slowly whenever we feel like
and
it.
They just have to play it long to Lukaku.
Yes.
Who would hold it up. Maybe actually you might want to
nothing's changing here.
Weirdly, you might want to get Pogba up front and have him hold it up because he's maybe the best at that.
Yeah.
And then people can join him, and maybe then Manchester United could make something happen.
See? There we go. There we go. Maybe this changes the whole season for them. Get them all in sneakers.
Okay, what if the grass is dry? What if it's, there's no mud, there's no slippiness, it's just grass that still has a bit of slip and give to it, but it's not extreme like slidey conditions.
What do you think?
I mean, I think the odds improve dramatically, right?
Okay.
I'm still... Honestly, if I had to bet, I would still put money on a Premier League team beating a League One team if the grass was nice and dry.
I still think you're going to have traction issues.
Yeah?
I think, because we see League One teams beat Premier League teams in the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup or League Cup or whatever.
They're both wearing cleats.
Yeah, exactly. Admittedly, that's usually with a weakened Premier League team.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a decent chance League One teams are doing just fine against a decent amount of the Premier League.
You think so you think correct equipment is that important?
Yes.
That there's no way. What if the team could? I'm sort of playing devil's advocate now. What if the team could adapt and you gave the team? I mean, it doesn't have to be Liverpool. Say it's Arsenal. So you gave them a day to spend the entire session finding out what works and what doesn't work and what you can do more successfully while wearing sneakers. And then I assume they would end up with some sort of quite stationary passing the ball kind of game.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. So then they're having to change their entire way of playing to fit within this system, and they have a day to do it. I feel like you're still going to want to try to run and cut and do some of the things you would normally do, but either you're not going to be able to do it. They couldn't
score that goal they scored against Leicester.
Nope. Or you're going to be very slow in your decision-making because you're going to have to slow everything down, and you're just going to be that much more aware of your lack of footing.
So what is, to answer Nathan's question then, you've kind of convinced me that it is that important to have cleats. What's the highest standard of team that Arsenal or Liverpool could beat while wearing sneakers?
I mean, they could certainly still beat a League One team. I just feel like in this situation, the League One team's advantage goes way higher up than it was previously. I don't know, though, because it still is the case that you're talking about a Premier League team, as I said at the very beginning, best league in the world. So that means you're going to have a lot of technique and talent and ability. So it almost is like maybe you could just keep the ball in the air the whole time, and it's a lot of like one touch to pop the ball back up, and then you play with the instep, and you just move it down the field that way. Like I think you're still talking about very good soccer players.
That's what I'm saying. So like it gets hard, right? But like any amateur team in Richmond, like say our team that we play on, they definitely still beat us wearing sneakers and we had cleats, right? There's no way that they wouldn't.
I mean, speak for yourself. Yes, they definitely would.
Confident in that.
Yes.
Maybe League One we could say would beat them, but there's definitely somewhere in between. It's just, I mean, it's a good question, I think, because we don't know the answer. Maybe it's 5th tier, 6th tier of English soccer that might then beat the team with sneakers on.
Yeah. Because it's also the case that if you don't have as good a footing, then when you go into tackles, like maybe you're a little bit more out of control. Maybe you're picking up some cards. But maybe you also like the tackles look worse.
Granit Xhaka's definitely getting sent off.
Yeah, that's almost certainly the case too.
Anything else to add on this very weird and wonderful question from Nathan Grimm?
It would be weird, and I kind of want to see it. I really do want to see like one team forced to wear sneakers just to see what happens.
It should be a cup sponsored by a specific sneaker brand. It should be like the Reebok Cup, and the higher end team has to wear Reeboks.
I think that's what Bolton should be forced to play in, right?
Reebok Classics.
There we go. All right, next question comes from Scott Ely, who asks, can you please explain the structure of the CONCACAF Champions League? Oh, boy. How do teams qualify? It seems like MLS Cup champion does not necessarily qualify.
MLS Cup champion definitely does qualify. It's just that the year they qualify doesn't make sense.
There we go.
It soon will because they've changed things up. And I think, Scott, it's even more confusing right now because we're in a weird transition stage that makes the years seem even more off than they used to be.
All right.
There's my summary.
All right. And explain why we're in a weird situation.
Because the CONCACAF Champions League has changed. It used to be that, for example, MLS Cup champion would be one of the, if it's American, would be the American team that qualified. Then the next season...
We'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah.
The next season, there would be the start of the CONCACAF Champions League, which would take place in like fall or so, and it would be those weird three-team groups. Then you would qualify from there, and then the February of the next season, you would have the knockout round. So you would have the MLS Cup champion from essentially 2 years ago playing in the knockout stages of the CONCACAF Champions League.
And that's how you want it.
That is not how you want it necessarily. Things have changed with the CONCACAF Champions League so that teams from the US, Mexico, and Canada now go directly to a 16-team knockout stage, which starts in around February, where they're joined by one team from what's called the CONCACAF League, which is from the smaller nations who have their own, essentially, knockout tournament in August, September, October. Okay, that's the new setup. But we're in that weird transition phase, so that the MLS teams that entered in February 2018, which is, we watched it all this year, right? They were the winners from 2016.
Yep.
They were the winners from 2016. So 2018 CONCACAF Champions League, which is obviously over. Tigres, I believe, won it. It was the 2016 MLS Cup winners, the 2016 Supporter Shield winners, the US Open Cup winners, and the other conference winners.
Conference winners, perfect. Okay.
Because that's how it works. Like if someone wins the Western Conference and the Supporter Shield, then Eastern Conference goes in.
And how does Canada factor into that?
Canada just have a Canadian championship. Toronto win it, and then they represent Canada in the CONCACAF Champions League. 2019 is where it gets weird.
Yeah.
2019 is where they straddle the two different leagues. So the 2019 entrance into the CONCACAF Champions League, which starts February 2019, will be the 2018 MLS Cup winner, to be decided in December, the 2017 Open Cup winner, the 2018 Open Cup winner, and the 2016/17 combined best record team in Major League Soccer, which I believe is going to be Atlanta United.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. All right. That would explain why they have qualified for the CONCACAF Champions League. I saw that tweet today, or maybe it was yesterday, that they have guaranteed continental
They've guaranteed the combined. There's actually a table if you look at the CONCACAF Champions League qualification stuff, and I think they have something like 124 points.
That sounds about right.
Over 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Then when we get to 2020 is when things will have normalized a little bit. So the CONCACAF Champions League will start in February 2020, and it will have the 2019 MLS Cup winners, right? So they will have won MLS Cup in December 2019. They will play in the CONCACAF Champions League February 2020. It'll be straight in. 2019 Open Cup winners, 2019 Supporter Shield winners, and the 2019 Other Conference winner. So all will be back to normal in 2020, and it will all make a bit more sense.
I don't know why, winner, Other Conference team is so hilarious to me, but it is. And I get why it works.
So you could just phrase it as Western Conference champion, Eastern Conference champion. They both get a spot, right? But I think Supporter Shield maybe gets a better seeding.
Of
there
course,
you go.
yeah.
But the Supporter Shield winner is always going to be also either the Eastern Conference or Western Conference winner.
All right. 5 more questions for you. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think I have anything else other than to say, and then at what point do teams actually put money into this and U.S. teams do well?
It's slowly but surely happening, Taylor.
Okay.
It's slowly but surely happening, Taylor. Toronto, who were representing Canada, not necessarily Major League Soccer, but we'll take it anyway. They made the CONCACAF Champions League final in 2018.
There we are. All right. So well done to Toronto, who are or are not competing in the next iteration of this tournament.
I have not followed the Canadian Championship closely enough to know the answer to that.
But you followed everything else well enough to explain that succinctly. Thank you, because that was a much better job than I certainly could have done.
There's probably a year I got wrong, either through a typo or misspeaking, and I'm sure I'll hear about it on Twitter.
And yet I feel like most of the people organizing the tournament probably wouldn't know themselves. Before we move on to our final question and some scouting, we've got another advertiser to talk about today.
It's The Athletic.
It's The Athletic.
The Athletic are sponsoring today's Total Soccer show. If you've been listening to TSS, you should know about The Athletic.
You should.
It is a subscription website and app with some very, very talented soccer writers and other sports writers putting their work on there.
This is true, and the one that I know...
Putting their work on there. Published there.
I knew what you meant. We both very much enjoyed the Peter Vermees profile by Paul Tenorio.
Yes.
Very long, very good, very informative, and makes me slightly terrified to ever come across Peter Vermees.
Same here, but it also makes me very impressed with what Peter Vermees has done at Sporting KC.
Yep.
I think Paul Tenorio does a really good job of getting into the very specific details that then illustrate the big picture stuff, and how Peter Vermees has established a whole culture at Sporting KC. And it also, I'm not sure if he specifically makes this case. He makes the case that Peter Vermees might be a great guy for the US men's national team coach, but he also might not be a good fit, and he also might just want to stick with what he's doing at Sporting KC.
Exactly.
Because he spent so long building it.
Yeah, and has so much control over everything that he can hold a meeting at 3:24 instead of 3:25, and people will show up at 3:24 and not 3:25.
It's not even a joke.
It's not, and it's terrifying to me because I've never been able to do that. Like, in terms of the numbers, like 1 through 5, 4 has always been the one that I'm sort of like, I don't know what to do with you. Because, like 3:24, I'm showing up at 3:25 or 3:20. Or probably 3:30 if I'm setting an alarm. Let's be real here.
Does it feel neat enough to you?
No. Like, I'm not waking up at 7:24 in the morning. I'm waking up at 7:30.
This is why you didn't get a Sporting KC contract.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And why I probably never will. Probably.
There's also a couple of the good stories. NWSL Confidential is one of my favourite columns. It's written by a mystery NWSL player. I really can't tell who it is. As part of Superstition Week, which was last week on The Athletic, they essentially talked about how superstitions can make locker rooms stinky.
Oh,
because people stick with certain pieces of equipment maybe longer than they should do.
The recurring theme from the Superstition Week seemed to be that everybody sticks with shin guards way longer than they should be sticking with shin guards.
This one was sports bras.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That one makes sense, I guess. I can't claim to have too much familiarity with sports bras, but it seems like if you found a good one, you stick with it.
Yeah, for way too long.
There you go.
Apparently. So if you would like to subscribe to The Athletic at 40% less than regular people have to pay, go to theathletic.com/TSS October. Theathletic.com/TSS October. 40% off an annual subscription to The Athletic.
All right, thank you to The Athletic for sponsoring today's episode. One more listener question, Daryl. This one from Christian Reeves. Would you like to ask it, or would you like to answer it first?
Oh, I feel like the asker here.
All right.
I'm going to ask you. Where do you rank college soccer as it pertains to the development of young players? And does a college player have any hope of playing with the US men's national team in the near future?
Yeah. I think it's this U.S. national team, right? This new like youngsters only model. I think the answer is that, there's everybody has a chance if you're still playing professional soccer. So that's like the generic answer. More specifically, I mean, you have players in like the past pool, like Jordan Morris, like Jonathan Nagbe, who have various levels of college soccer. And I think that there was a time when it was college soccer was the direct route. That's going to be the way you get to the national team. I think now it becomes the exception.
College, get drafted, play MLS, play for the national team.
And now I think it's going to be the exception much more so than the rule. Because I think if you're playing college soccer, it means generally I feel like the path is like college soccer, draft, maybe a little bit of USL for the first season. Eventually you make MLS. And then if you play really well and break through, then maybe you're making a national team roster for like a January camp. But by then you're like 24, 25, 26. And then that does put you at a different like age range than the younger players.
What about the Jordan Morris example, where he literally played for the US men's national team while being a Stanford player?
The thing there is that it wasn't even necessarily about what he was doing in college, right, with his college team. It was about, as far as I understand the story, such as it is that Jurgen Klinsmann, like they scrimmaged against Stanford and he saw him and was like, hey, this kid's really good. I want him to show up.
Yep.
So you're going to have stories like that.
Sort of an accident.
Yeah, exactly. You're
Not
that
Morris
those.
wasn't talented enough, but just that it was a happy accident, happy coincidence that they happened to practice at Stanford and play against Morris.
But it wasn't that Jurgen Klinsmann was like super involved in the Pac-12 standings and had watched a bunch of Stanford games and was like, this kid is what I need. It's the case is that the national team manager saw this player play and said, yep, I think he could fit in, and then tried to use him, or I did use him rather. But I think, again, that's the exception. And I think it will continue to be the exception because until maybe college soccer completely modernizes and changes some things and incentivizes playing college soccer over going pro, I think you're going to see it far less likely to produce consistent national team players.
The one interesting part is I think, in a weird way, college can be a 1 year, almost finishing school type option, no pun intended. I think the best example is Reggie Cannon. So Reggie Cannon, FC Dallas Development Academy player, homegrown player, but they sent him to UCLA for 1 year in 2016. And he went and played for one college season, which isn't that long, which is part of the reason why it's not that great a development tool, right? Reggie Cannon went and played in 2016, one quick season for UCLA in college soccer. Then he was ready for Major League Soccer. Yeah. So Dallas essentially used UCLA almost as the equivalent of their USL team because they didn't have one.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's really interesting, not just because of like playing there for 1 year in the finishing school aspect, but because...
Or seasoning. It's like the season, like 1 year of seasoning when you're not a youth team player and you're not ready for full pro. Just go spend a year getting knocked around in college soccer.
True, but it's also still the case, though, that Reggie Cannon was a development academy player, right? So he's already has that connection to the club. So in some ways, I would say that like the avenues that have sprung up at club level of you can play for this development academy team and then maybe when you're 17 you'll play for their USL affiliate, you won't get paid so you're still eligible. Like if that player then plays a year or two in college, like yes, they've been in college, but I still don't think of them as a college player where they sort of were recruited by a bunch of schools, they chose this one, they didn't have any other club connections, now that they're in college they're there for 2 or 3 years, then they get drafted. I feel like that is sort of going by the wayside because of the prominence the Development Academy has, at least in terms of men's soccer.
Because there's more options, right, in terms of USL teams or just more paths to Europe, all that kind of stuff makes it much less likely that national team caliber players will end up going to college. I think except in the weird, rare cases where they just the clubs just think, all right, Reggie Cannon, go have 1 year.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we talk about, because I feel like we skipped to the end of Christian's question. The first part is, where do you rank it in terms of the development of young players? I would argue, this won't be a popular argument, but I'd argue that it's way down there at this point because you're better off with Development Academy and USL and MLS being a homegrown player, or you're better off going to Europe because it's literally a full-time professional environment, whereas college soccer is, half the year, and the games can be somewhat physical as opposed to really technical. I mean, I'm not saying that they're like horrible, but it's definitely more physical, less technical than you'll be playing elsewhere, even in America, but definitely in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's just not where the best players will end up.
It's not. And then I would even like take it another direction and say that one thing I struggle with questions like this is like I don't know what you could rank, sort of, because like for what we just said, that everything is so interconnected that you might be a development academy player who plays for a USL team, but then also plays a year in college, then gets drafted, then goes back to that USL team, but then maybe gets some first team minutes. I don't know where the development is, and I don't know, like, in that case, does USL factor into that, even though he was in a development academy and played for college? Like, that's where I get kind of confused, because I feel like there's so much overlap that it's hard to rank. But in terms of...
there's no clean categorization, I think.
Yeah, but, like, in terms of producing, like, consistent national team players, I definitely think that college soccer has fallen pretty far down the rankings,
because there are other options.
Yes,
but I'll bet you there will be someone who is overlooked in some way and just suddenly comes good in college and makes the breakthrough. Yeah. So I would argue that in the next 10 years, let's say, there will be a college player that plays for the someone who's done like 3 or 4 years in college that becomes a US men's national team player. Just because there's so many overlooked players or under-scouted players, someone will slip through the cracks and college will catch them.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what we were talking about with Gedion Zelalem, that, like, yes, there's this stated emphasis, or not even stated, but there appears to be an emphasis on playing young players, getting young players involved in the national team at a younger age and seeing what they can handle and what level they can handle. But there's still going to be the 27-year-old who becomes the MLS Golden Boot winner, and now they're getting national team looks. And, like... that, to me, is what you're talking about, or like that's the more likely...
late bloomers.
Yeah, exactly. Is they come through college, they establish themselves, they start getting minutes, then they start scoring goals, or they, if they're a defender, they start playing really, really well consistently. I think you're right that you're still going to have those stories. I just don't know how common they're going to be.
One guy I look at right now as well is Thomas Hilliard-Arce, which we heard so much about him while he was in college, and he just really hasn't gotten looks with the LA Galaxy since he's been drafted there.
The Galaxy, a team not known for their rock-solid defending.
Well, yeah, but so despite their defensive worries, right, he still hasn't really gotten a shot. Exactly. I'd love to know, I'd really love someone at LA Galaxy to explain to me, is it because he's not good enough and he wasn't ready for MLS despite being a standout centre-back in college, or are you guys just being dumb?
Yeah. I'd also be curious to know... like, there's definitely an idea, like when you look at the NFL, sometimes you have a quarterback drafted and they're starting right away, but a lot of times you want like the year to groom them and get them used to what it's like to play in the NFL, and you have that sort of intermediary quarterback. And I also don't know if that's a thing that MLS teams like to do with college players. Is sort of...
maybe, but time's ticking at that point, right? If they're 22 already, like you really haven't got a year to lose.
Yeah.
When Mark McKenzie's playing centre-back at 19 for Philadelphia Union, then Thomas Hilliard-Arce doesn't need... a year not playing for the LA Galaxy.
That is probably true. Yeah. Hooray, college.
But still, here's the other thing. Even, like, maybe you don't end up being a US men's national team player. I would still love for college soccer to be part of the cultural experience of soccer in the United States, a valuable part, but maybe just not a path to the US men's national team.
All right. You know there you have it, listeners. Dale Grove wants college soccer around.
It looks great. It looks fun, right? It looks really enjoyable, and everybody talks really fondly about their college soccer. Well, not everybody. Most people talk fondly about their college soccer experience. Just because it doesn't end up with the national team or with you playing for Bayern Munich doesn't mean that it's not a valuable part of the soccer culture.
Certainly.
Yeah? Okay. Are you ready to talk Total Soccer Show Scouting Network?
I am indeed.
First scouting report today comes from Ed Ritter, who is scouting Ben Mines, the 18-year-old American attacker for the New York Red Bulls. Have you heard of these guys?
I have.
New York Red Bulls. Ed says, although Ben's season ended weeks ago after his broken collarbone, he was one of 3 Red Bull New York 2 players, all of them with first-team contracts, to make the USL's 20 under 20 list. Ben came in at number 10.
There we are. Well done, Mr. Mines. Up next, Landon Cotham scouting Handwala Bwana, the 19-year-old Kenyan left-winger for the Seattle Sounders. Bwana has been out with a metatarsal injury since May, but started for Seattle on Wednesday night against Orlando. He scored his second MLS goal, albeit off of a deflection, to help the Sounders clinch a playoff spot.
It's not a bad little contribution.
And then I believe did a celebratory dance with Nuhu was the final point of that scouting report.
Lovely. Anurag Anjaria is scouting Andrea Novakovic, the 22-year-old American striker on loan at Fortuna Sittard from Reading. Anurag says Novakovic got 6 minutes in the loss to Colombia and did not have time to make an impact. Dave Sarakin spoke about his lack of playing time. We had a question about this, right? Stating, the fact that we're continually calling him back shows that there's progression. As I've gotten to know him, he offers a little variety as a forward. He's not just a back-to-goal guy. He can move in different ways than some of our other forwards, and the hope is he'll get a good run out against Peru.
That confused me a lot. So all of that sounded like the type of quote Dave Sarakin had given after the Peru game when he was asked why didn't Novakovic play in that game. The fact that he said we think he'll get a good run out against Peru, but then I believe he was like a healthy scratch from that game day roster. I don't know what to make of that.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's also worth going back to that. We had a listener question about what about when players get called up to the national team and don't play any minutes, and I think the example used was Novakovic.
Yeah.
He did actually play 6 minutes in that Colombia game, as noted there.
Yeah.
Half of our listeners would have heard my correction, which I inserted into that show. Half won't have. So I'll just make that note here for the people that didn't catch it the first time.
There we are. But don't you think that's a little strange, though? That he said where he's going to get minutes against Peru and then did not get minutes against Peru?
It means a decision. There was a change in decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Make of that what you will. Jeff Markman scouting Reece Nelson, 18-year-old English midfielder on loan at Hoffenheim from Arsenal. Nelson scored a brace for Hoffenheim in their 3-1 win over FC Nuremberg, bringing his tally to 4 goals in 4 Bundesliga appearances. Decent, I say. The first was a calm volley inside the 6-yard box. The second was a deft right-footed finish into the roof of the net from a tight angle. Nelson is making the most of his loan opportunity, lending credence to the rumors that his development is a factor in Arsenal's apparent disinterest in extending Danny Welbeck's expiring contract.
So is Danny Welbeck booing every time Reece Nelson scores?
I believe
for
so.
Hoffenheim? Dylan Viach is scouting Kai Havertz, the 19-year-old German midfielder for Bayer Leverkusen. Dylan says Kai started for Leverkusen in their 2-2 draw with Hanover this weekend. As has been the case in a game that Leverkusen was the more attacking side, Kai had a great performance, got an MLS assist on both of Leverkusen's goals and dictated the overall flow of the attack.
Well done, Mr. Havertz. Robert Newman scouting...
Havertz.
Cry Havertz, is that what he said? Cry Havertz and let slip the dogs of war.
Yeah.
Robert Newman scouting Mason Mount, 19-year-old English midfielder on loan at Derby from Chelsea. Mount did not get his first official cap for England during the international break. He did, however, start and played well in Derby's 2-1 win over Sheffield United and cleared a goal line chance in the 82nd minute to preserve the lead. Going forward, Chelsea announced that they will allow Mount and fellow loanee Fiyako Tomori to play in Derby's upcoming Carabao Cup match against Chelsea.
That will be exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see their loanees taking on the parent club.
And you shall. And you shall.
Mason Mount's a good example of someone who, went with England, didn't get any minutes, but still a valuable experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Guy Yedwab is scouting Serge Gnabry, the 23-year-old German wide forward for Bayern Munich. Guy says, a report in Bild from before the international break alleges that there's been a locker room schism between the old guard and the new guard of players whose minutes have been limited. Not just Serge Gnabry, but also James Rodriguez and Leon Goretzka, each of whom has played about a third of the available minutes since the start of the season. After the break, Gnabry got his third start for the season against Wolfsburg, failed to make an attacking impact, and was sacrificed after Arjen Robben got a red card. Sacrifice is harsh.
It is indeed. He did also
like
start...
in Apocalypto.
I doubt it was that severe or that long of a line. He did start today's Champions League game against AEK Athens.
Mm-hmm. You mean Ike?
Yeah, we do not know the score at time of recording, but I'm going to guess they did okay.
They did okay against Ike.
Yes.
All right. Thank you to everybody for the scouting reports. There are scouting assignments to be made. I've got emails. I will be assigning scouts in the next few days, I promise. If you would like to ask us questions for future shows, the URL is totalsoccershow.com/questions. totalsoccershow.com/questions. If you sign up to support the show, totalsoccershow.com/join. At $5 a month or more, we give you a scout in the Scouting Network. $10 a month or more, we guarantee to answer a listener question. Taylor Rockwell, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll be back again later this week.